When people talk about the good old days, what exactly do they mean? I suppose for some of us, we're looking back fondly at memories of childhood. I'm aware that's not the same for everybody. But being a child 150 years ago was very, very different and very difficult. We're going to look at the story of one particular child, Peter Keegan, who lived just a few hundred metres from here back in 1876. Peter Keegan lived on this road called Range Lane and a street called Sunnyside. This street looks very, very different to what it did 150, 160 years ago. I can't find Sunnyside anywhere, and what we have instead are new houses, lots of flats, businesses. There's one old street and there's a church a little bit further down. Possibly they were there at the time, but I think everything else is quite new. So Peter was no different to many other children in Halifax at the time, as in he had to go and work in the mills, and his sister worked in the mills as well. The expectation was that that little bit of extra money that they made helped the family, because the families were not earning enough to live. We were in peak Victorian England at this time. Peter's place of work was just down the hill from here, one of Halifax's dark satanic mills. So Peter worked here at Dean Clough Mill, one of the biggest mills around, and certainly one of the most dark and satanic. Now, interestingly enough, this street here that I'm on at the moment leads to where I used to live in Boothtown for a few years back in the 90s, and I would walk on here. Dean Clough today is full of businesses. It's pretty much all in use. There are kind of bars, there's art galleries, etc. And all this here was abandoned in the 90s. So when I used to walk on here, all this, the glass was out, and this was just a big empty building. And yeah, if only I was filming back then, it would have been a good video. But yeah, today, Dean Clough is very different. Dean Clough began operating around 1802 by John Crossley, and over the decades there were extensions added, more buildings added, and it soon became the biggest carpet manufacturing company in the world. And at one point 5,000 people from Halifax worked here alone at one point. It is absolutely massive. It ceased operating as a carpet manufacturer in 1983, and after that a lot of the people who worked here actually ended up at John Holdsworth's, the opposite side of Halifax, where I used to work. Yeah, I worked in a mill. That's why I've always got an interest in these things. But yeah, we'll have a quick look round. I don't know quite where Peter worked. Entering the story comes Harry Crowther, who was an overseer here at the mill back then. An overseer is somebody who does that job, oversees the work. He was known as one of the most brutal and sadistic men ever to work in the mill, and he would walk around with a strap, and he seemed to take great delight in just inflicting punishment on the children who worked there. It would only take something like a drop of a bobbin or a wrong stitch or something like that, and Harry would be there with his strap, ready to brutally bash around the head any children who worked there. And he seemed to pick his favourites, the ones that he wanted to pick on and attack, and one of those, sadly, was Peter. The brutality against Peter was sadistic and sustained by Harry. Every day he would come back beaten black and blue, and it reached the point where his father actually sent a letter to the mill to ask Harry to not attack him anymore, and if there was an issue, just send him home, he would deal with him. This was ignored. His father then suggested legal action to stop these assaults, because it just seemed to be that Peter was the one Harry was quite happy to take his strap to at a moment's notice. Then came the day. Peter's sister hurried home after work and told her parents that Peter had suffered an almighty assault at the hands of Harry, that he'd hit Peter around the head 3 times with the strap, and blood was constantly pouring out of his nose, and he was complaining of a most horrendous headache. Peter, though, got home. He ate his tea and went to bed and got up the next day, still had blood pouring out of him, still had the headaches, but still went to work, because to not work back then you just weren't paid, and you could probably suffer an even worse fate for missing work. So Peter got through it, but still had the blood pouring out and still had the bad headaches. This got worse and worse as time went on. Appeared as well that Harry had picked Peter up and thrown him into the rollers. These were children, small children. Imagine a 9-year-old. Most of them are small, aren't they? So Peter carried on, and then it reached the point the headaches just got too much, and one night he went to bed, but then early that next morning seemed to be suffering from some kind of delirium, and unfortunately things got worse, because he seemed to be kneeling by his bed going, "I didn't do it, Harry, it wasn't me." It was as if Harry himself was there in the room with the strap ready to beat him, and he was having visions of this man. And sadly, 10 o'clock that morning, Peter passed away. Harry was arrested and put on a manslaughter charge, whilst the facts were ascertained about what had happened to Peter. Now, I would love to tell you that this had a happy ending in the end, and that Harry was put away for the rest of his life for the brutality that he showed, not just Peter, but other children working in the mill. But unfortunately, this one isn't that story. An inquest was held at the Coach and Horses here on Haley Hill, just below where Peter used to live, and that's Range Lane going up there where we started the video. The pub is gone now, but again, when I lived here, it looked like this. At a post-mortem, a doctor had decided that Peter had died of brain damage, and that brain damage had started roughly 6 months before his death. Each attack that Harry had done had accelerated the process of the brain damage and moved poor Peter a step closer to death each time. So it kind of became inevitable that that was going to happen. So Harry Crowther was charged with manslaughter and faced trial at Leeds, but the trial unfortunately didn't last very long because there was no physical exterior injuries to Peter, even though he'd been attacked, and it was proven that he'd been doing that for months because of the letters from the father. His sister had seen these attacks happen and they'd been reported. Because there was no actual physical damage to the skin on Peter, the case was dismissed and Harry was free to return to Dean Clough and continue, no doubt, his brutal ways against the children who worked there. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of the mills having the ghost of a boy walking around the buildings. This ghost has often been spotted in reflections in windows and mirrors, and when people have turned, there's been no sign of the boy. Could it be the ghost of Peter Keegan, or maybe another boy tormented by the cruel and sadistic Harry Crowther? So from here, the entrance to Queensbury Tunnel, I'm guessing they're doing something with this as they've cleared the entranceway. Maybe it's opening as a cycle track. We leave you, we're right next to Dean Clough, it's just there. That's the end of the story. So no justice for Peter. Harry Crowther, to me, comes across as a bit like one of the very worst characters from a Dickens story. You know, if you can picture those people from the Victorian era. You know, brutal times indeed. So like I started with this, talk about the good old days. Definitely wasn't in the 1870s, was it? Wherever you are, Peter, rest in peace. And I'm so sorry that you ended up meeting your death at the hands of one of Halifax's most sadistic people. Sadly, on this occasion, got away with it. We'll see you soon, guys. Take care.